think we could let people in now on the record button. Give people a few minutes. It's welcome everybody. I'm just gonna give folks another minute to join and then we'll start on time. Or we'll give people to 3:31. We'll give them one. I just want to respect everyone else's time. Hey, can everybody hear me okay? Thumbs up. Okay. Thank you for joining us, everyone. I'm really pleased to see such a terrific mix of practitioners and policymakers logging in from around the region and statewide too, I see. We apologize for saying hello and then muting you in one breath, but given the number of speakers sharing really valuable information this afternoon, we'll open up speaker mic shortly and encourage everyone else to place their questions and comments via the chat function throughout the webinar. We should have plenty of time to address all those questions, especially if people can stay until 5 per the calendar invite. And my colleagues, Beth Dever and Inoa Batista, will be monitoring the chat to make sure that we're surfacing questions and responding to other comments. As you heard when you signed on, please note we are recording this webinar so that folks who are unable to join us can still benefit from the information and insights that will be shared by what we think is a very impressive panel. Thanks also, of course, to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus for its leadership and for convening this forum. Not so many organizations can inspire the participation of such a geographically diverse and talented mix of public and private leaders. Representing the caucus today is Ben Schnelly, who is the manager of housing initiatives. I know several of you are on this call because Ben gave you the information, but for those of you who haven't worked with him yet as a partner, don't miss out anymore. You should know what the caucus is up to. My name is Robin Snyderman, and my firm, Brick Partners, particularly Beth and Inoa and myself, have had the honor of supporting the Mayor's Caucus in a number of its housing initiatives over the years, including its Homes for a Changing Region technical assistance strategy for local leaders, and most relevant today, it's supporting municipalities for asylum seeker services program. That's a mouthful. SMASS is what most of you know it as, if you know about it at all. Funded by the Illinois Department of Human Services, SMASS was created in a time of crisis in short order to address the unique needs of communities that were suddenly becoming home to new arrivals, even though few homes were actually available for that constituency. In rounds 1 and 2 of SMASS, which were late 2023 and throughout 2024, eligible applicants for that funding were only municipalities stepping up to address this new demand, setting the table with key nonprofit partners to actually provide the needing services, not only in the housing arena, but also wraparound services, food, legal assistance, and healthcare. Eligible applicants in round 3, which became available late last year, could also include nonprofits who had the explicit support of their local leaders. While the available services remain the same, The more recent rounds of this funding could also be used for the broader population facing homelessness in these communities, as the bottom line needs and strategies are the same. Today's webinar is particularly focused on housing because all communities and service providers are struggling with the shortage of housing options for very low-income households. And as SMASS comes to an end, we want to make sure everyone is aware of the evolving landscape for those seeking asylum and other emergency housing assistance. Those who stepped up providing housing to this population in recent years have undertaken really difficult work in difficult times. And many of you are on the phone. Many of you on the phone have been toiling, sharing your passion and your talents. And we thank and congratulate you for all that you've done in this regard. Just with SMASS alone, outside the city of Chicago, just in this last fiscal year, so since July through May, 2,800 people in the suburbs were provided with case management, 1,200 with focused housing case management. Nearly 1,000 people were provided temporary shelter. 600 households were provided with rental assistance. And all told, nearly 2,000 or so were able to get housing with or without that rental assistance. Thanks also in part to the fact that there have been 400 job placements through SMASS through May, and also through resources like the Sanctuary Working Group that's represented on this call today as well. Each community did different things, tapping local ingenuity and partners, funded and leveraged both. So our plan today, as you see on the slide here, for the next 20 minutes, is to introduce you to just 3 of the local innovators and leaders who were involved in that effort. From Elgin and the South Suburbs in particular. Many other SMASS grantees and their sub-grantees are on this webinar, and we welcome your input as well. It was, we know that each of you have different stories to tell. Then our plan for the next close to half hour after that is to introduce you to 4 terrific resource people who have been providing services, ideas, support, and leadership on this topic in very different ways. We'll have Colleen Mahoney from the Illinois Department of Human Services, and Emily Krishunas of the Funders Network, Gabby Laredo from the Faith-Based World, and Anna Arzwaga from Latino Policy Forum, reminding us of the basic legal rights we all need to remember. That's what Anna is going to be talking about. I'm sorry we don't have bios for everyone or time for lengthy introductions, but we will place this recording online with all those relevant resources discussed, and we'll provide links to the bios of this amazing group as well. So again, for those of you coming in late, don't hesitate to type your questions into the chat or even share resources that you think people ought to know about. We will make sure that those are reflected in the conversation. At the end, we'll allow the panelists to ask questions of each other, and then we'll open it up to everyone. So without further ado, we're going to open our mic to the first panelist, Karina Nava, the assistant manager in the city of Elgin, who I understand was honored at the annual Home Illinois Summit recently at that conference, along with her mayor last week. So well deserved. And we could take the slide down that we're going to open this up to the speakers. So Karina, where are you, Karina?
Thank you, Robin. Yes, I'm right here.
We have 3 questions for you.
Right.
So first, if you could describe why the city of Elgin stepped up to pursue more resources to address this particular demand for local asylum seekers in Elgin, and whether it was difficult to take leadership in this space. How did you reach consensus?
Yeah. So thank you everybody for being here and learning a little bit more about the work that we, not just Elgin did, but our community partners. And you'll hear in a little bit from Diana, who's with Centro de Información, who's one of our key community partners for all of this. So Elgin is not a sanctuary city, but our leadership has been very vocal about it being a welcoming city for the longest time. We have a very caring community. And when the SMASS grant was announced, I got multiple emails from community leaders, from elected officials, and that forwarded the opportunity to me, and that signaled immediate interest. So we started looking into it, and Centro, of course, was like, when can we start? And we pulled in Food for Greater Elgin, which is one of our local food pantries, and Well Child Center. They focus on dental hygiene for children. So we partnered up and we submitted an application. And Elgin is the sixth largest city in Illinois, and we already have this robust network of social service providers. But it's really key when you have partners who are already used to working together and you have good relationships with them, and it literally just kind of helped catapult us into that next level. Was it difficult? Absolutely, it was difficult. I think at the beginning early on there were a lot of people who wanted help, but the public sentiment shifted a little bit as more asylum seekers started arriving, and they were feeling the impact of that. And we, as a city, received many negative emails and criticism about using resources for asylum seekers. It didn't matter to them that the city was basically just uh, s- receiving the payment and sending it to the nonprofit. So it's just a pass through. They didn't want anything to do with it. But despite the political discomfort, we leaned into our core values, and we had the support of the mayor and the city council, which I think is key. And we knew that housing people would reduce the strain on the community long term. So it's had that vision, right? And it would avoid increased homelessness in the area, which we already had. So this was just something that it made sense for us. And yes, it was uncomfortable and it did not feel good a lot of the time, but we knew that this was work that we could do because we had our community partners who were boots on the ground and really getting that work done.
Yes, and I'm glad that Deanna will also be able to share a few moments at the mic because the work in Elgin has really been impressive. And I think one of the common questions we hear from municipalities is, they're interested in this, but uh, don't know how to address the needs, don't know how to set the table. I don't know if you want to say a little bit more about, with this new population increasing the demand for existing emergency housing services and also generating, more demand, what was your role engaging partners? How much of a heavy lift was that for the city?
Yeah, so the arrival of asylum seekers, I mean, we were in contact with the state, we were in contact with the local partners. We were just communicating constantly because there would be a rumor that a bus arrived and it wasn't true, right? And so we were just constantly trying to plan A, plan B, plan C. But it just intensified an already existing housing crisis. And also the sentiment between people who have been here in the community who were undocumented for a long time and saying, how come you're helping them and not helping us? Same thing with people experiencing homelessness. How come they can get into a hotel or how come we can't, right? And so there was a lot to deal with at that level. And currently, Elgin lacks a low barrier emergency shelter, aside from our seasonal winter shelter that the city sponsors every winter. And we're not a direct service provider. We don't have a Department of Health or of Human Services. We don't have social workers per se that do that type of work. So we knew we had to lean on our experienced partners, and Centro de Información was one of them because we know that they work with that population and they have lawyers and they have experience. Food for Greater Elgin, providing food, and going back to Centro, the housing part of it, right? The SMASS grant was instrumental in helping fund those temporary stays at hotels or finding. I'm sure Diana will talk a little bit more about how they found housing units, landlords. I mean, they did a phenomenal job. And for us, it was more about coordinating and making sure the reports um, were collected and put together and sent to you, Robin, to make sure that everything was in line to get our reimbursement. But yeah, I mean, really, it's just leaning on that partnership.
Thank you, Karina. And our last question for you, similar to what we'll ask all of the panelists, is just to tell us a little bit more about what your concerns are looking forward and what opportunities you see for housing stability for this population and others at risk of homelessness in Elgin.
Yeah. Well, one of my concerns, as I'm sure everybody on this call is concern is there's just simply not enough housing. We've got problems with not having enough. I mean, we have a good amount of affordable housing, but we need more. I think at King County, they're calling it um, entry-level housing or workforce housing, you know, for teachers, for bartenders who like, right, like that type. So all of that, and we're working towards that, but it takes time, it takes money, and the rising costs of building new construction right now are intense, along with federal cuts to key homelessness prevention programs. Those are some concerns, challenges. And I know that it can get overwhelming if we just focus on that, but I think we need to focus on what we can control locally. And so, like here in Elgin, we have the Affordable Housing Fund where we allocate CDBG funds annually through the Kane Home Commission for the creation and preservation of affordable housing. We also have developer partnerships. So we're proactive in engaging them and bringing them to see some other projects that we've done here in the community. If anybody wants to look up one of our award-winning projects, 1212 Larkin. It was an adaptive reuse project where we were able to save this historical building, but also build on top of that. It was a very long process. It took a lot of collaboration, a lot of community engagement, a lot of drawings back and forth. But in the end, it turned out to be a beautiful project, and there's people living there now, and there's a huge wait list. And so more projects like that would be great. But I digress. We also work with our continuum of care. So we work very closely with them. We're a part of the continuum of care as well. Just ensuring coordination across service providers for those experiencing homelessness, I think is key. And we've recently added a full-time homelessness response coordinator in the city manager's office to prioritize this work, so we can be more strategic in how we are addressing not just housing the people who are experiencing homelessness and getting to functional zero, but long term, what does that look like in terms of housing for our community?
Thank you, Karina. I think, that perspective of how to partner both with limited public sector resources, but also about how your framing has enabled you to leverage more private sector support as well. And that's, essential right now. And you've done a great job. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
your time and your leadership. And Deanna, you're here somewhere, I hope. That was a great build up, but I don't actually see your face. So can you confirm that you're here, Deanna?
I'm right
There
here.
you are. I see you. You're on my top right. Okay. So, yes, so as Karina described originally, when Elgin set the table, Centro was one of their key providers. But then in the most recent round of SMASS, they took the lead in this. So they needed the support of Elgin in order to secure these resources, according to the Metropolitan Mayor's Caucus and the IDHS requirements. But it's been Deanna's baby. And so, Deanna, two questions for you. One, from your perspective as a welcoming center, could you describe more what you're seeing in terms of housing demands for your clients and tell people how you've just addressed this during SMAS? Karina gave the thumbnail sketch, but feel free to dive a little deeper and show off on some of your outcomes because they've been impressive, please.
Thank you, Robin. So I think I just want to note specifically that there was a very short turnaround timeline to apply for these funds, as I recall, 2 years ago. And so I think it's important to note that there was a partnership already in place between Centro de Información and the city of Elgin. And a lot of that is just based on relationships of people who are in the community doing the work, serving the Latino community and serving the immigrant community and other nonprofits who just network frequently. So that's important to note. But yeah, I was all over the application, assisting with that as soon as it came out. I was thrilled when it came out. I started in this particular position actually 1 week before the first buses started arriving into Chicago. So I had to learn very quickly and network with other agencies who were assigned to staff the hotels where the new arrivals were first housed. And I learned a lot from them about what to do in case that ever were to happen out in Elgin. As over that first year unfolded, a lot of the people from the Chicago area filtered out to the suburbs, asking for additional support just because there were, oversaturation during certain key points in that timeline of that first year in Chicago. And we know, right, that Latino Policy Forum has done this great research on how Latinos overall have filtered out to the suburbs over the last decade, especially from Chicago out to the suburbs. So what I learned was that people who were filtering out to the suburbs were not eligible for housing support. They had to stay in Chicago to receive those services. So when SMASS came out, I was very, very glad that that was our first opportunity to provide that kind of support out in the suburbs. So as a welcoming center, people were coming out asking for support, but ultimately, the welcoming center caseworkers called around in a 50-mile radius almost sometimes looking for open beds, and it was just really hard to come across. And as Karina mentioned, the local homelessness shelter had and was no longer an emergency shelter. And so we oftentimes had to pay for transportation for the clients to get sent back into Chicago many times until we had the SMASS funds available to provide that emergency shelter assistance for them. And then the team, again, because of the strong Latino community connections out in Elgin, tapped into networks of landlords who wanted to help. And so some were recruited, but some found out about the program and called us, actually, which was a really great thing. And so we had a set goal of assisting 50 families in that first year. And I believe that we ended up with almost 70 that first year, families who we provided a shelter for. And it is very much a prevention of homelessness initiative, as Karina mentioned also. So the unique thing about Centro's work with this was that it wasn't just housing. We expanded our welcoming center team to offer wraparound casework services for all of these individuals. And we also had an immigration team to assist them with their immigration applications. And I think the way that it was set up was really helpful. And I definitely got it when I read the NOFO, what it was going for. And at the conclusion of our first year, more than 75% of our clients had their work permits after they had submitted their asylum applications or temporary protected status applications and their work authorization applications, and were able to take over paying their own rent. Unfortunately, that number is much lower this year. It's less than 50%, based on the survey where we have received a good response of the 54 families that we have been able to help this second year. And that's 100% due to the fact that a lot of them had temporary protected status pulled in April and lost their work authorization and have since lost their employment. One of the other persons who is on this call is Natalie Yandel, who is the manager for our caseworkers this year for the SMASS, and she has an extensive background working with different housing agencies out here in the Elgin area. So she has been a real asset and leader to the team this year. And she just reported to our network of subgrantees who met this morning, actually, that I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought for a minute, but she, reported that we have a lot of more individuals in crisis management than usually. They start off with crisis situations, and then with case management, the crisis level goes away. And this time it's almost turned around. They came in and got their paperwork filled out and turned in, and now they're in crisis towards the end of the program.
Yeah.
And it's a real challenge to find shelter to transition them out to. And I know that Natalie also has used the Latino Policy Forum resource of right of immigrant tenants to give multiple presentations out to clients who are in situations, because even though they had legal status, we know, I mean, it's a different conversation topic, but some of them were not living in the best conditions, right? And even though they had their own home and were able to keep their family together, we were still worried for their welfare. So I guess that's a very long answer to your first question, but that's where we're at right now.
Right. No, I mean, I think the shortest answer to my question that I hear from you all the time is just lots of elbow grease. As somebody in the housing field, I know that there are many systemic solutions usually to housing placement. And it was inspiring to watch you all start from scratch and creating relationships, phone call by phone call. So, and I think your point about the continuum of care is very important. We like to think it's going all in the right direction, but it's important to still be, it goes both ways, and the support is still available when people need it. My second question for you was similar to Karina, so it's okay just to say, ditto if you want to, but I think just one more, actually, before I get to that one more note about the importance of the city's role, because I think for a lot of nonprofits, and also the public sector leaders on the phone, it's valuable to hear from you, your perspective on the need or lack of need for municipal support. But then, what are you most proud of? What are your hopes, concerns for the future? And I'm going to have to ask you to be even more concise, because
Okay.
I didn't watch the clock because I was listening so happily to your comments there.
Yes, and I'm sorry about that. I'll be much more brief. I would say number one thing that I'm most proud of, there's two. The team got into housing assistance, rental assistance, emergency shelter. And that's not a program or a service that we had done before at all at Centro de Información. And so we connected with other agency partners and learned how to do that very quick, and added that program to the point where people started to get to know us as a housing support agency. And I kept reminding people, this is temporary. We don't plan to continue it, but we learned and added a new program. The second thing I would say very briefly is the city has been a great support, but in addition to the city, the churches in Elgin have organized and have been a backbone of support for our team and our clients. And I can talk more about that later if people have questions, but they have provided welcome kits for people who went into their new apartments but didn't have beds, didn't have plates. Churches were really good at collecting stuff for them that was either new or gently used. And our families had stuff that households have. And in addition to that, there's one church in particular who started a separate fund to help our clients cover their security deposits, because the security deposit was not eligible for reimbursement in our SMASS grant program. And so a lot of our churches helped financially with a lot of our families as well. And that has been just a great partnership of people of faith who want to step in and help the immigrant community locally.
Gabriella, we'll speak more to that in a little bit. So I'm glad you teased that conversation.
Yeah.
Okay. I think I'm gonna let you come back later if you want to add more to the concerns and hopes, Deanna, because that was great and we can add those in. But I'm gonna move to Tina Rounds right now, CEO of Beds Plus. Another, there were some parallels in your story, except that in the earlier rounds, it wasn't the city that asked Tina for help. It was the mayor's caucus. We saw that a greater degree of technical assistance was needed in certain places. And then in SMASS 3, she stepped up as an applicant in her own right. So, Tina, if you could remind us of your relevant work in the space and how you became involved in SMASS, and how that role evolved. I guess I I spoiled that a little bit, but you've got more to offer. That's where we want to start, please.
Yeah, thank you. We're a housing provider as part of the Suburban Cook Continuum of Care. And during the first kind of round of buses that were coming into our, Chicagoland communities, we started to work with hotels that were being stood up in the service territory where we operate. So we reached out, we started working with the welcome centers that were assigned and the IDHS staff that were assigned there just to see how we could be helpful. Because we did know how to shelter, we did know how to do rental assistance, we did have funds related to the COVID response in general. And so we offered our assistance, and that's really kind of how we started to be in that space. We also reached out to Cook County during the time to see if we could set aside additional funds, recognizing that the families in particular needed longer than the 3 months that were initially being provided, and the landlords wanted more too. So when the first round of SMASS came out, we did try to establish, but were unsuccessful, a shelter in one of our municipalities, but due to a zoning glitch, they were not interested in moving forward after some exploration. And as had been noted, there was a quick turnaround, so there wasn't much time to mess around. So then we were called in, and there was an opportunity to support the Ford Heights, kind of a budding shelter, and an idea really to utilize a asset in, Ford Heights with a new operator, but there was a need for, basically technical assistance to set up the shelter, to, supply the shelter with people who, were eligible, so Southern Border asylees, and to make sure there was an infrastructure that kind of met general compliance standards of shelters. So after Brick Partners called me a couple of times, we worked with both the Village of Ford Heights as well as a small nonprofit that was in, and really our goals were not only to continue to be involved in this space, but also to continue to work with, the development of overall shelter in the south suburbs. So because we had just established a medical respite, we were part of a triage pilot that was funded through the state that was kind of an early kind of idea launch of the One System initiative, where we were combining homeless services and asylum seekers in the same facility, utilizing a blended staff and a blended approach. We have a walk-in program for low barrier access. We already kind of had the pipeline and the system set up. So then we just worked with this third-party entity to move people through to that men's only shelter that was set up after, some whirlwind repairs and kind of setting everything up fairly quickly. I think we did it in about, 45 days. And so they're still going, and our hope is that that will continue after SMASS ends. But SMASS has generously, supported and funded that program, which is a benefit both to the municipality. We created a new partnership kind of in that Ford Heights area. It is next to Cook County Health and Hospital System location and clinic, and it's within bus service to a lot of industrial job opportunities, so it really worked out well. And then in the third round, we did, take on a rapid rehousing grant, both in continued partnership with the Ford Heights program, but also because we have a triage center that helps about 650 to 700 people a year. At our height, we're about 65% Southern Border asylum seekers. So, we just utilized, again, an infrastructure that was already in place and, an expertise that had been developed in the last couple of years to move people through to housing, in the Southwest suburban community primarily. So.
Thank you, Tina. Can you say a bit more about what some of the key outcomes have been of that work in terms of placements,
Yeah.
what you're proud of?
Yeah, just in this last year, we're hitting about 90 people that we've been able to, kind of scatter into housing. We leveraged, I think there's 15 different landlords. So those landlords have been key. They're partners of ours that are working with us in other, housing programs. We have a wide variety of housing programs. But not, those are just the people that we helped with rental assistance, for, Southern Border Asylees only, again, because it was a joint grant. We've been able to connect over 100 people just with general housing placement. And then many people with, different services, as had been mentioned already. Many of the people later in the grant cycle in that third round had already gone through the application support center, had already been connected with legal services, did already establish, whatever benefits that were eligible for, limited food assistance and some medical providers. So we were really seeking to work to integrate those individuals into the community and, try to develop those longer term life skills in our community. We hired, a woman who helped us with translation services and ESL classes, and worked to help people enroll their kids in school and, provide tutoring and supportive care for people so that they can stay. But as had been noted, I mean, the concern really is that there's changes in the way the federal, state, and local partnerships. There's a real breakdown. And so, it really is up to the community to step in, our state to step in, to support people who are struggling with housing insecurity, whether that is southern border asylum seekers or persons experiencing homelessness. So I'm just really excited about the work and that is happening at the state level in particular, and with the city's One System initiative, because overall, as a state, we've been able to expand the resources that are available to all people, and
Yes.
really maximize this opportunity. So it's really exciting, and I'm proud to be a part of it in some way.
Well, thank you so much, Tina, for all your help. And that was just a great introduction, actually, to our next speaker. That was a good pivot. You hit on a few initiatives and programs that, IDHS has been taking leadership on and working in partnership with others on. And so at this point, we're going to change to part two of this discussion, and talk about relevant information and resources for both communities and practitioner. And our first speaker is representing Illinois Department of Human Services, which has been, the funder of this SMASS work, and obviously so much more has really stepped up in every way possible. So Colleen Mahoney, Assistant Director of the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness. I'm looking for you right now. There you are. Okay, on camera. Hi, Colleen. Thank you for being here. So, I think our main question for you is just to please provide an overview of IDHS and other related resources related to supporting homeless services and housing needs, which of course includes new arrivals alongside so many others in crisis. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Robin, and thanks for having me. I have some slides that I'm gonna see if I can manage to pull up real quick.
Can we give her permission, Kellen?
Okay.
Is it okay? Good.
Are you all seeing this?
Yes.
Okay, I tried to pull them up in a more sophisticated way, but that did not work. So this will work just fine. Thanks for having me, everyone. As Robin said, my name is Colleen Mahoney. I'm the Assistant Director of the Illinois Office to Prevent and End Homelessness, which is a statewide office that's housed within the Department of Human Services Secretary's office. And we refer to ourselves kind of colloquially as OPA. So you might hear me say OPA as well. Like I said, we are a statewide office that coordinates work around housing and homelessness across Illinois agencies. Sorry, I'm seeing someone's writing. Is that, are we able to turn that off?
That is,
And so that's us. Just to tell you a little bit of the history of this office, we were established as a governor's initiative in 2021 via executive order. We chair several bodies that guide and lead our work, including a statewide interagency task force on homelessness comprised of leaders of about 15 state agencies, a community advisory council on homelessness. We're the Office of Illinois' Chief Homelessness Officer. And we organize a state plan to prevent and end homelessness that really organizes and connects the state's work across agencies on homelessness. And we release that plan every 2 years. So just to give you a little bit of a sense of who we are, and then I know we're short on time, so I'm going to keep us moving here. I wanted to tell, Robin thought it would be helpful for folks to hear a little bit about the One System initiative, kind of in the context of, as we started off talking a little bit about SMASS particularly. So the One System initiative is a process to integrate the systems supporting new arrivals and other people experiencing homelessness in Chicago, but really, across the state, as communities not limited to Chicago have participated in supporting new arrivals over the last few years. Through OSI, we're merging these support systems to maximize access, equity, and efficiency for all people with shelter and housing needs. And sometimes you might hear people refer to One System initiative shelters, but the One System initiative is not limited to specific shelters. It's really a system-wide initiative affecting all homeless services and the state strategy around homeless services. This initiative kicked off about a year ago. And the first 5-6 months of it was really a community-led visioning and recommendations development process where we worked with over 50 community-based organizations and people with lived experience in both systems to develop a vision of what a unified system should look like. And the community partners developed a report of recommendations kind of documenting that vision. In the fall of last year, we moved into kind of an implementation planning phase. And then from December onward, we've been in the kind of rolling implementation of unifying these systems. And I'm going to tell you a little bit more about progress to date on the next slide. Would it help with these annotations if I stopped sharing and then maybe re-shared? I'm going to try that. Okay. Hopefully that's better. Okay, are you all seeing this again?
yes,
Okay.
yes.
So don't have time to go into a lot of detail about One System. I can point you all towards some more resources about it, but in terms of initial implementation, in Chicago specifically, there's a new 24-hour 24/7 physical access point for shelter for requesting shelter placement, which is really taking the landing zone that was part of the new arrivals response and opening it up for everyone. So we're very excited about kind of retaining some of those innovations from the new arrivals response. As part of the One System initiative, all shelters are now serving all populations, kind of regardless of how long someone has been, in Chicago or in Illinois or the country, that all shelters are open to all populations, all shelters, funded by the city of Chicago or the state of Illinois. And we've also made a variety of curriculum available to providers, both, whether you're coming from a homeless services background or are more specialized in working with immigrants. We have some training available to support people in thinking about kind of working in a unified system. So I'm happy to provide that information if that's of use. And then we don't have information on these slides, but we've also been able to retain many of the beds that were stood up in the new arrivals response. So we're excited about that as an ongoing resource. So that's the One System initiative in kind of brief. And I'm going to give you all just a brief sense of, I think Robin wanted to get folks to get a sense of, what are some of the state's programs, funding streams for homeless services, homeless prevention, and supportive housing. So I'm going to tell you about those kind of just at a really super high level. So first, I think many people are probably familiar with their local continuum of care. If you're not, this is a really important and valuable partner in your area. Every area continuums of care are federally kind of recognized entities that coordinate homeless services and housing for people experiencing homelessness within a specific geography. So every geography in Illinois and every geography in the country is covered by a continuum of care. Illinois has 19, and the state also utilizes continuums of care. Some of our program funding streams, especially like for supportive housing, you would be matched to through your local continuum of care. So they're important local partners. And I have some links in this deck to where you can find your local continuum of care. And this is a map to kind of continuum of care versus county on the right. I think most folks are probably familiar with thinking about, what is our toolkit of homeless prevention, homeless services, and then housing programs. This is kind of one way we think about it is the kind of most broad interventions that are toward that prevention side of the spectrum, and then kind of ongoing affordable housing programs with services with no time limit are kind of, our most scarce and precious resource. And all these resources have an important role on the spectrum. So I'm going to give you all a little sense of some of the state's resources along this continuum and where you can go to find out about local providers in your area for each one. So within prevention and diversion, we have the IDA court-based rental assistance program, which I'll highlight a little bit more on the next slide. That's a very important state prevention resource. The homeless prevention program is kind of a flexible homelessness prevention program for folks that are still housed, but having a housing crisis to receive some cash assistance. So there's a link to where you can find providers in your area. And then we have a shelter diversion program for folks that are kind of knocking at shelter's door, but able to quickly be diverted and resolve their housing crisis. And those referrals happen through your local continuum of care. DHS has a path in terms of street outreach programs. DHS has a PATH program, which funds street outreach to people with serious mental health needs. So we have a provider list there to providers in your area. We also have a new street outreach program awarded with opioid settlement funds that is providing street outreach to people experiencing homelessness with a substance use disorder. So I put a link to kind of who are the awardees of that new program. And then within the shelter bucket, our main state shelter funding source is the ETH program, or Emergency and Transitional Housing Program. So I've put a link to where you can find all of the state's providers of ETH who are shelter providers. And then the DHS Domestic Violence Prevention and Intervention Program is kind of a domestic violence related services grant with many eligible uses, but many of those providers provide domestic violence specific shelter services with that grant. So the best way to connect with those providers for DV shelter is to call the Illinois DV hotline anywhere in the state. And then DHS also has emergency solutions grant allocation, which funds a variety of shelter and other homeless services in communities. We have several housing programs. The DHS rapid rehousing, those referrals, as well as the DHS scattered site permanent supportive housing, also happen through your local continuum of care through the coordinated entry system. So really important, to have connections with your local continuum of care and understand their coordinated entry process. The supportive housing services program, I think I can add a locator to this. Those referrals aren't always happening through the local COC, but often they are. And then the statewide referral network is a supportive housing resource for folks that fall into specific populations, including folks at risk of or experiencing homelessness. But you do need to be connected to a service provider who is an SRN connected service provider. So at this link, you can learn more from our kind of waitlist operations partner, CSH, about what that process is. And then IDA is the state's kind of capital funding agency for housing development. So they regularly fund both permanent supportive housing development and affordable housing development. And you can find their units, many of their units listed at ilhousingsearch.org. And those are often kind of your traditional affordable housing programs. Let's see. So I think for the sake of time, Robin, I'll just keep us moving, but wanted to make sure folks are aware of the court-based rental assistance program. This is a program funded by the Office to Prevent and End Homelessness, but administered by the Illinois Housing Development Authority. It's a really important program that provides emergency rental assistance to households in eviction court for both past due rent and future rent assistance, as well as things like moving costs and court fees. So that program, you can connect with it through illinoishousinghhelp.org/CBRAP. This year, the General Assembly funded it $50 million. And so that application will be going live again sometime this summer as we get into the state's FY26. And then I also have, I'm happy to share these slides with Robin, and she can share them, information about accessing shelter in your local communities and staying in touch with our office. So thanks, everyone.
Colleen, thank you so much. I didn't mean to make you feel rushed through that. That was, I mean, maybe Tina and Emily and a couple others know all that stuff by heart. But I think for most of the communities and many of the practitioners, it's really helpful, as things are evolving, to see what you are up to. And we will definitely post that on the Mayor's Caucus webpage, and hopefully those links will be live. And again, I think I'm not seeing lots of questions in the chat, but don't be shy. And if you are shy, we'll have this information available for you to digest. Right. Deanna is asking for a copy of the slides. We will provide them. Take a breath. You didn't even get winded there, Colleen. That was a lot of information. Okay, thank you. So we have a few more speakers, and then still we're on time for plenty of time for questions. I will note that up until now, all of our speakers have been in some way involved in this SMASS program with the Mayor's Caucus. And these next three were actually, as we were talking about this housing webinar, all three of these people were recommended by multiple sources as providing information that would be useful for local leaders, useful for nonprofits, whether or not they've been involved in SMASS. So I will start with Anna from Latino Policy Forum. Many of you have probably seen the publication, Housing Rights for Immigrant Tenants. But we asked Anna to discuss that publication and her other thoughts on, starting with the core issues, Anna, that you think you need everyone to understand and pass along in terms of tenants' rights in these challenging times for vulnerable populations. And that's our first question for you.
Yeah,
Thank you
of course. And hello, everyone. Very happy to share this space with you all. This is a very excellent and very relevant question, given current times. I think that one of the most important tools that I'm sure everyone can agree with that can be passed along to community members is basic knowledge on their housing rights and the policies that we have in place in Illinois to protect tenants regardless of immigration status, while also keeping in mind, language access. A few years ago, as Robin mentioned, the forum developed a handbook that includes a breakdown of different tenant protections responsibilities and obligations, also includes free housing resources available, and then like a description of, different legal processes that immigrant tenants should be familiar with to defend their rights and, report any unequal treatment that unfortunately they may sometimes encounter while particularly renting. The handbook itself is available online in English and in Spanish. And again, language access in mind. I can gladly include that in the chat or as a follow-up material, whichever one you think is best, Robin. It's
All of the above.
all of the above. I'll mention both of them once I'm wrap up, but it's a working document and constantly updated to reflect the current housing landscape. But in terms of core issues, there are plenty, as you can imagine. I would say that there are three main buckets. The first being, fair housing policies in Illinois and how immigration status comes into play. And also, what to do when an immigrant tenant believes that their rights are being violated. We know that there is this fear among the immigrant community of, like you said, Robin, living sometimes in inhumane conditions, coming forward and reporting these violations in fair housing and safe quality housing can be very intimidating at the moment. So I do want to, mention, and that's included in the handbook, that in Illinois, as many, people may know on this call, we do have the Immigrant Tenant Protection Act, or ITPA, in place that prohibits landlords from harassing or evicting tenants based on their actual or perceived immigration status. And, given the current information, it's also very important to know and to communicate with their community members that this also means landlords can't threaten to call ICE as well. Another one, to another core issue, I would say, is understanding the public charge rule and what trying to access social supports like Section 8, SNAP, and others, how they're not considered when a person tries to adjust their legal status. That lack of, knowledge on this could deter people from trying to access the social benefits that they really need. So I think, it's very important for us as CBOs and leaders in our communities to really communicate this, that it's okay to access these benefits without worry that it may affect their legal status. One thing to know also is that we saw, that in the last Trump administration, it resulted in changes to public charge, which caused a lot of immigrant communities to not be able to access the social benefits that they need because of fear that how it may affect their legal status. It was reversed, but just thinking about going forward, it is possible that public charge could be revisited again by this current administration. So, our handbook goes into that as also like a core issue, understanding public charge, and how, how it may or may not impact legal status. The third also is, I would say, housing resources for all tenants, regardless of immigration status. There's plenty of resources and amazing organizations that offer free or low-cost services that are also bilingual. So that's another, I would say, key theme that the handbook explores. And there's, resources that are not just central to Chicago. It also encompasses Cook County as well. So I could go on and on, but I would say that those are the three main issues that I would say is, be familiar and educate your communities on fair housing policies, understanding public charge, but also, as we have been doing in this space, connecting them to the resources that they desperately need.
Thank you. That was very informative, and maybe this was implicit in what you said, but is there more you want to add on some of the more misunderstood issues for this population in this time?
Yeah,
mentioned-
of course. There's two off the top of my head. One is sometimes, when I take on some community education here in the city, outside in the suburbs, a common misunderstanding that I have found is that sometimes immigrant tenants may assume that because of their legal status, they're excluded from these housing protections and policies, which is far from the truth. And I think what I find a lot is that community members are always so thankful afterwards, after presentations and workshops, because they mention, that they didn't know. They feel a little bit, they walk away from these a little bit more empowered, and equipped with tools like, oh, if this happens, this is who I submit a complaint to. If this happens, this is how I'm protected. So it's always, a great feeling to walk away knowing that you, in a brief hour of a workshop, you were able to give that knowledge to communities. Another misunderstanding I would say is that while we know that every tenant in Illinois is covered by Illinois laws, but there are, cities and counties with their own local laws. And so sometimes it can be challenging to know not only the state protections that are in place for housing, but also like regional nuances. And I believe that the Forum Handbook does a great job of doing that, and also giving the information of where you can find more details in particular to where you live.
Very helpful, Anna. I think the last question for you is, I know you work a lot in the city, but I think most of the people on this call are based outside of the city. So are there ways they can access your support? Are there any other particular resources you think folks on this call should know about?
Yeah, of course. And Diana, thank you so much for bringing this up. One of the forum's strength is community education, and we often partner with our suburban housing partners like Centro de Información to give workshops, to give webinars. Through our social media, we also provide a lot of education and other research to reach our suburban housing partners and city partners as well, in their communities that they serve. And oftentimes it's not just, workshops that we give to community members. Sometimes it's CBO staff that reach out to us and request that we give, webinars on how they can, as advocates, support the immigrant communities that they are serving. And it's, presentations for housing rights for immigrant tenants, but we also recently put together another resource guide for immigrant families and providers and advocates called Safe and Healthy Living. This is slightly different in that it not only includes housing resources, but it also includes resources that are in the education space, immigration space. But the aim of it is to really empower communities with resources, and also includes family safety planning and strategies during these challenging times. I can also, provide that resource as well in the chat.
That would be great. Thank you again for joining us today, Anna.
No, thank you for the invitation. This is great.
Now we are going to be moving on to Gabriela Loredo of the Sanctuary Working Group. Again, Deanna gave a sneak peek of some of the ways the faith-based community has been super helpful to that particular nonprofit. But Gabby, if you could tell us a little bit more about how the Sanctuary Working Group provides support to asylum seekers or others in crisis, working with local leaders, working with nonprofit partners. Yeah, tell us about yourself, please.
Yes. So the Sanctuary Working Group is in a very special position. So we're not completely non-for-profit. We're kind of like a non-for-profit, but also like the sanctuary, like advocacy group. So just a little bit of a background. Our Sanctuary Working Group is made out of 30+ organizations. So they're tied to like non-for-profits. They're also tied to faith-based communities, and also like leaders in certain parts of the country, but also certain parts of the city. So we have a little bit about everything, right? So our mission statement is really just to be a solidarity organization that supports and accompanies vulnerable migrants in their journey towards sustainability and independence. So ways that we support is very different ways. So one of our programs that I run is our housing program. There's different levels in that, which is emergency housing. In case we need to connect someone to a shelter, find shelter through one of our private hosts that we have, or connecting them through a church that can host somebody. Short term is someone that's just in between, that's like, trying to work towards independence, but they need some time to kind of work on something. So we help with like short-term placements. So we also have landlords that we set out to kind of build a relationship with them, so we can make that easier process for someone to be able to obtain an apartment, or also provide long-term housing, which is something that we're moving away from currently. But we have had families and folks that we have housed for about a year of housing. So now they're which is under our transitional housing program, so they can build towards independence. Which I'm really happy to report that a majority of them have already found housing or renewed a lease, so they can be able to provide housing for themselves. Aside from the housing piece, every single participant that we help has to be connected to case management. So the way that it works, that you have to be part of our membership to be able to access our resources. So it's a very like reciprocal relationship that we have, and people can always join by completing like an intake form and just talking with our admin and just seeing, what we're about, right? Because we're also a collective. So if anybody's interested, please reach out. But in those ways, we do connect with organizations that offer case management. We also have groups from our faith-based leaders who also have groups within their own churches that go and accompany the families to assessing some resources or just helping them integrate into the community that they're in. We also have volunteers and members that are part of our membership who are running kind of like our legal aspect. So they host like workshops about know your rights, tenant rights. They also assist with like completing asylum applications. We have people who are lawyers or we're lawyers, and just really like help out with that aspect. So it's really like a wraparound service that we really have and really thankful to have, especially because a lot of our members are volunteer, right? We have translators, we have people that also like donate furniture items, so will like donate their time and like helping us move a family and advocacy. So it's a lot of support that we're able to provide, thankfully. But we all also are a very like a small organization. At the same time, outside from our membership, our staff, we only have a couple of staff members that help just kind of really like make those partnerships and connect those resources in-house as well.
Well, not to dismiss what you're saying about limited staff, but of course, my next question was sort of twofold. I'm curious how many communities you've worked in throughout the region, and how folks on this call might be able to engage some of their faith-based partners to work with you and to benefit from the network.
So we work all across Chicago and surrounding areas. We have some members and also some connections within the surrounding suburbs who are also doing their thing independently. And, we have been connected through folks, especially through the faith-based communities. There is a member who is part of Sanctuary Working Group, but they saw that there was more organizing that could be done specifically for just faith-based. So they have an organization called FCI. So they're also a partner who is in charge of multiple churches throughout the state and city and surrounding areas who we're able to connect as well, who do similar work to what we do as well. And also just really through networking through our churches that we're connected through, as you know, they're very much connected with each other. And also like a lot of advocacy, right? I think there's so many people we're all within the same spaces and within like the same meetings or attending like the same in-person webinars or whatnot, or get funding through similar funders that we're able to like network. Right. So that's basically what we do. A lot of it is, engaging the people that want to do the work. And they go out into their communities and have those conversations and advocate for the work that they're doing, and how going and talking to their local church leaders or organizations that they work with, or even like individuals who are able to, offer a place to host somebody for a short-term period or even a longer term period, or who have time on their hands and are willing to help out. Yeah, so definitely, like I said, they do have to be tied to our organization. And right, that means that we sometimes do through some way, we might have a participant who's already tied to a member of ours, but they're also receiving services from another organization. So then we'll work with them as well, and then they're interested in accessing our services. And then, we can have that conversation with them to see if, they're interested in joining, right?
Thank you.
Yeah.
Very helpful. Thank you for joining us today. Okay, last but definitely not least, Emily Krishunas, thank you so much for joining us, with all of the limits in public sector resources. I know everybody on this webinar is on the edge of their seat, wondering what communities and practitioners should know about your work. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thanks, Robin, for the invitation. And I've learned so much on this call. Thank you, everybody who highlighted their work. Like Robin mentioned, I lead a funder collaborative. It's called Chicago Funders Together to End Homelessness, or CFTEH. And it's a group of about 40 largely Chicago area foundations. So these are grant makers that care about preventing and ending homelessness in the Chicago region. And we are a local chapter of a national organization called Funders Together to End Homelessness. There are maybe half a dozen local networks all over the country, and we're the Chicago one. And it's really a place for, if you are a foundation and you have some sort of strategy that's related to housing, our sort of theory is that your grant making is going to be a lot more effective if you know what all of your other peer foundations are doing with their own grant making related to that same set of goals. And I also think, I came to Chicago Funders Together having worked most recently in city government in Chicago. And I think that experience made me think a lot about the ways that philanthropy and government work together, and the ways the government funding is often at such a large scale, but has so many constraints that you're all very familiar with. And then philanthropy is often working at a much, much, much smaller scale, but with a lot more flexibility. And so through Chicago Funders Together, we think a lot about the way that public and private dollars can be braided and blended and complemented in interesting ways. And a lot of the work that we do is focused on what historically we had seen individual funders not really doing on their own. So the bulk of our grant making and our convening and our funder education is focused on things, many of which have been highlighted throughout the call, that are more kind of systems oriented. So things like policy advocacy and community organizing and power building and narrative change work. We're so lucky and proud to support Latino Policy Forum and the narrative and storytelling work that they lead. And also sort of public sector staff capacity and expertise and regional coordination and planning. We're so proud to support the Illinois Office to Prevent and End Homelessness in some of those ways. So we are really, especially in a moment like this of a lot of challenge and constraint, trying to think about the ways that a group of funders working together with a lot of planning and intention can maybe catalyze investments in some unique ways, or maybe sort of make a targeted investment in something that the public sector likely wouldn't be able to support on their own.
Thank you. You mentioned working with philanthropy and partnership. Can you say a little bit more about how you work with the IFC Immigrant Funders Collaborative in particular?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, first of all, if that's a table of funders that any of you are familiar with, then you likely know Alice Cottingham, who for many, many years has been supporting that collaborative. And Alice was one of the first people that I met back in 2020. I was coming to a role for the first time in philanthropy. I was going to staff this funder collaborative. I was trying to understand what a funder collaborative was and could be. And Alice and all of her experience of bringing together this group of philanthropic partners going back probably to 2012 or 2015 for a long time, really was somebody who helped me understand what it can look like to kind of align and mobilize philanthropic partners. So IFC is certainly one of many different funder collaboratives and pooled funds that we have an opportunity to learn from and work with. I think, they're a really great model of what it looks like to focus on things like advocacy and legal aid and legal supports. And I think that that's very much been reflected in the way that we thought about our own pooled fund, the Housing Justice Fund, which supports advocacy and community organizing. We also, many of the previous speakers have been reflecting on the moment in time in 2013 or 2023 and 2024, and sort of the peak of new arrivals. And that was a moment when Chicago Funders Together and IFC and a number of other philanthropic partners were co-hosting with the city and sometimes the state a set of learning opportunities. So many of our foundation members sit at multiple funder collaborative tables. Many of our funders are shared because there's so much intersectionality between, of course, the issue of housing and immigration. And so we had the opportunity to partner together on a lot of educational opportunities where we were helping foundation partners in the region just wrap their heads around what was happening and what they needed to know and where the most important investments were that they could make.
Thank you. It's really encouraging to hear all the different levels that you're working at and the range of partners. And of course, the big question we have is, are you working outside of the city of Chicago? As again, most of the folks on this call are outside the city itself.
Yeah. I mean, one of the interesting things that Chicago Funders Together does every year, so we've now done it for 5 years, is we collect all of the grant making data from all of our members. And that's so interesting. It's such an interesting exercise to have a group of foundations tell you what organizations they support and geographically where they support and what special populations they support. It tells you so much about the areas of overlap across foundations and also about the gaps. And I'll be the first to acknowledge that I think funding kind of outside of the city of Chicago is one of those gaps that we often see in the data. But across the 5 years, there's been $150 million of collective investment within this group. And about 2/3 of it has been within the city of Chicago. And 1/3 of it actually has been in broader suburban Cook County or the Collier counties. So that was something that surprised us to see that there was actually a decent kind of 2/3, 1/3 spread in terms of support outside of the city. Certainly a number of our members, and I'm happy to share who they are, they might be familiar to all of you, folks like the Healthy Communities Foundation and Schreiber Philanthropy and the Oak Park River Forest Community Foundation and the Broad United Way Network. All of those are very active members of Chicago Funders Together, and all of whom support organizations in suburban Cook County and often in the Collier counties. Also, I'm happy to drop this in the chat. I know that this doesn't apply to everybody, but it does apply to anybody who's doing work within suburban Cook County. Chicago Funders Together just launched last Thursday a response fund because we've been absolutely flooded in ways you would expect, similar to this conversation with questions and concerns from community partners. It is not nearly enough, but we are making, we have this open application process. It's super quick. It's like a 10-minute application. And it's for flexible general operating grants between $10,000 and $20,000 for any shelter or housing provider within the city of Chicago or suburban Cook County. It's
Awesome.
just a start. We're sort of fundraising and grant making as we go. We hope to do additional rounds. But again, if you or someone that you know and care about runs an organization that's in suburban Cook County, they would be eligible to apply.
Thank you, Emily. I think that was great news for a lot of people on this call. And as you see, there's lots of capacity and innovation going on, and it was really helpful to learn from you. You were talking about being flooded with, that this is a time where everybody's flooding with questions, but in fact, this seems to be a group that is absorbing information and figuring out how to put it to work in their own backyard. But this does conclude the panel discussion part of our webinar, and we do want to give folks a chance to ask questions if they want to. We were going to start just if any of the panelists on, Emily, Colleen, Anna, Gabby, Tina, Karina, Deanna, if any of you want to ask questions of each other or of the group before we open it up more broadly, we thought we'd give you that first bite at the apple. Yeah, are they all are they unmuted, Colin? Just double check that. Yeah. Okay. So no pressure. Anybody else have questions? If not, we will absolutely, go ahead, Mayor. Can we unmute him, please?
Okay.
So I think that Colin just sent you an invitation to unmute yourself. There you go.
Yeah, thank you.
Please
Um,
introduce.
so I have my mayor's hat on, but I also have my son's entrepreneurial hat on. So he's got a product that is, someone's used the term workforce housing, entry-level housing. So these are 2-bedroom, a bath, 900 square foot units, kitchen, little porch area. They have different facades, maybe 6 or 7 different combinations, maybe up to 10. They need a municipality, let's just say Elgin, to say, here is 4 acres of land or something that we'll donate. Peter would bring workforce housing for under $100,000 a unit to an area. And the words he uses is workforce, entry level, transitional. Burr Ridge was the first, by the way, to get the migrants. They stayed in our hotel until the governor figured out that it was in DuPage County. And in any event, it's temporary, maybe for migrants. It's going to continue, obviously. So I was just wondering if anybody's got any insight. Would any municipality be interested in a proposal where, if the municipality provides the land, a company could come in and do the rest? Bring it all here, assemble it, market it, whatever, and for under $100,000 a unit.
So for folks who don't know, this is the mayor of Burr Ridge. So it's good perspective. And I don't know if anybody wants to respond to this question now. I won't interfere if the answer is yes. If not, though, I would recommend, and you've been doing this already, communicating this information to Ben of the Mayor's Caucus, because he's okay. So good. Because I think through Homes for a Changing Region and other initiatives, we often find developers and mayors finding each other through these kinds of ongoing conversations. So I won't stop if anybody wants to reply, but if not, again, we'll have this information in the follow-up, Mayor, and people might want to contact you directly.
Sure.
Mayor Grasso, I'll put my email in the chat, and I'm certainly happy to connect your son with my colleagues at IDA who might be good thought partners around that as well.
Sure.
Good
Appreciate
idea.
it.
Good idea. Any other questions? Colleen just put her email in there. Good. And, we will, if it's okay with everybody, we'll think about how to do this appropriately. We want to encourage you to keep talking with each other. So if you're not comfortable with us sharing your contact information, please let me know and I will not share it. Otherwise, I'm inclined to share this RSVP list so that people can stay in touch with each other. All right, well, we have 5 minutes left. I hope you will use it enjoying this beautiful day. And again, we'll put this information out there. We encourage those of you who haven't already reached out to Ben Schnelly of the Mayor's Caucus to learn about technical assistance available to local leaders to do so. I think there's been a great track record of success thanks to that, to the work of the caucus and a lot of different, more than 60 different municipalities. But mainly, we just want to again thank all of you who are on the ground responding during this time of crisis, sharing your expertise, sharing your resilience and perseverance. And Ben, I see you came off camera. You want to say hello to everybody so they see who you are? Okay.
I just want to echo what Robin said. Thank you to all of you, and thank you to Robin and the team at BRIC for being a great partner with the Mayor's Caucus in this very essential initiative over the past few years.
Thank you, Ben, and thanks again to IDHS for enabling all of this to happen. So take care, one and all. We will be in touch.